Before we get started, I have a quick favor. I've been self-funding the Finding Genius podcast for 5 years now. I've done over 3,000 episodes. And as you can see on YouTube, we're up over 1 million views on the channel, which is fantastic. The next thing I really want to push on is to get up to 10,000 subscribers, because once we do, we'll be able to put a donate button, and we'll be able to solicit donations to help keep the podcast running and to also get the Finding Genius Foundation moving along. We have a big project studying anxiety, depression, and PTSD, and working on a product to help people overcome these problems, because I've seen them explode recently after the last 2 years of the whole virus situation. So if you would, please subscribe to the podcast. That would help us tremendously. Give us a thumbs up and check in the description for Buy Me a Coffee. It's about $5. If you could buy me a coffee, I'd really appreciate it. It would help keep the channel going, and I love coffee. Thank you.
Dr. V here, just got done with an interview on the Finding Genius podcast. So honored to be included in this top 0.1% of thought leaders as we discuss headaches. Richard asked the pointed question, what is a headache? In the interview, I basically answered it with a parable type answer. And the reality is we do end up discussing the simply seven causes of headaches that will empower you to know what to do about them. So check out the interview and podcast as we go through and discuss each of those 7 potential triggers for your headaches. Enjoy.
Forget frequently asked questions.
Common sense, common knowledge, or Google.
How about advice from a real genius? 95% of people in any profession are good enough to be qualified and licensed. 5%
go above and beyond.
They become very good at what they do, but only
0.1%
are real geniuses. Richard Jacobs has made it his life's mission to find them for you. He hunts down and interviews geniuses in every field: sleep science, cancer, stem cells, ketogenic diets, and more. Here come the geniuses. This is the Finding Genius podcast
with Richard Jacobs.
Hello, this is Richard Jacobs with the Finding Genius podcast. My guest is Dr. Scott Vrzal. He's the author of a book called The Headache Advantage, which sounds like a jumbo shrimp or a contradiction. We're going to talk about 7 patterns that could tell you why you have headaches, where they're coming from. You know, it could be headaches, migraines. I spoke to him offline about a couple of concussions I had. So we're going to talk about, head-related trauma and headaches and stuff. And I think it'll be a very good episode that is very applicable. I would guess many listeners suffer from various types of headaches. So we'll get into it, and welcome, Scott. Thank you.
For sure. Thank you.
First of all, what's your background? Why do you deal with headaches? A lot of times people have a personal experience with the thing that they treat. So what's your background?
For sure. Like most people in healthcare, I got into healthcare because of issues I was having. And one of those main ones was headaches. I was a young athlete, natural bodybuilder at the time, and still an athlete, but I started having gnarly pounding headaches every time I did bench press, and tried all the anti-inflammatories and aspirin, Advil, Tylenol, and couldn't get any of that to touch it. And I tried to just push through it. The harder I'd push through it, the longer the headaches would last. And so, of course, being exertionally oriented, my loving family took me to the general practitioner, physician, and they said, "Oh, you might have an aneurysm. Don't work out. We need to get a CAT scan, with contrast and so on." And went through their drill and did a CAT scan. They said, "Well, you don't have an aneurysm, so go see a psychiatrist." And that was their final definition for me and final help. And so that kind of started me down the road of what other options there might be. And I was also fairly close to that time diagnosed hypoglycemic, low blood sugar problems. And so I quit eating sugar at 14 years old when I realized what a punk I was when I ate sugar, which typically was donuts before and after junior high at that time. So that's where everybody was hanging out. And realized that didn't work so well for me. So I gave up sugar and got more and more obsessive about my health. And then I had my first chiropractic experience, which relieved me. And I was driving home in my little yellow bugs, just feeling like the whole world had come off my shoulders and life was good. And thought, man, I need to be able to do this for others. And I want to have this feeling for the rest of my life. So I went to chiro school. And the first thing I did as I got into, clinic and treating on my own was to identify the now 7 patterns of headaches, and each location has a trigger mechanism, an organ that will refer pain to that area. And then we can go from there and figure out what typical foods or supplements or things are going to, help or hinder those various glands and organs.
So you figured out if someone tells you I have a headache and I get headaches a lot, you'll know why, and more often than not, they get it.
100%.
That's
My
awesome.
favorite,
Okay.
my favorite line is headache literally never leaves my office. And so that just gives me that unshakable confidence in the material, in how this works. And that also is part of why the book is called The Headache Advantage. For me, in my world, the reason the headache is an advantage is that the location of the headache literally will tell me the priority. In other words, a person can have, a whole list of, say digestive related symptoms. And if their headache is a left-sided headache, I know that stomach is the main reason all those other problems are going on. If their headache is in the back of the head, I know that thyroid and, mechanisms within the thyroid are the primary reason they're having hormonal issues or digestive issues or emotional concerns. So it gives me a smoking gun. Carry on.
Okay. All right. So maybe it's a stupid question, but what is a headache? Why do people have like pain or pressure or whatever it is in their head? Like, what is a headache?
Right. And that's the age-old question that unfortunately has eluded a lot of, healthcare, especially because there are no pain receptors per se in the head. There's pain receptors in the muscles, on the skull, like for the jaw, for example. But there are no pain receptors in the brain. And so the way I figured out these patterns is literally it's acupuncture meridians that ended up being the smoking gun, if you will. So like the stomach meridian does kind of dances around the left eye, goes down the left side of the head. So I started looking at, well, if I fix the stomach, does that take care of this left-sided headache? And lo and behold, when I did protocols that would have helped the stomach function better, then that left-sided headache would go away. And literally, we're talking about headaches, but literally any pain. It could be a left-sided jaw pain in this example. It could be a left eye pain even. Had a kid with a sty this morning in his right eye, shifting gears a little bit. Right-sided headache is a gallbladder problem. And so anything on the right side of the head, this kid had a sty in the right eye that was, again, tied to gallbladder function. So we did protocols and gave him some homeopathics to help the stomach function, help the gallbladder function better, and that sty will go away. So it was mostly acupuncture based that helped me tie all this together, in addition to understanding muscle organ correlations.
Since there's muscle organ correlations, the act of eating either something that is good for your body or bad for your particular body,
right?
I would think that would manifest a lot in headaches. Is there a connection there? Well, what brings on a headache?
Yeah, so 100%. It's a great question. So when we find these areas of weakness or, again, using the headache to kind of prioritize, then we look at, if we're talking about a gallbladder issue, for example, is it something the person's eating? Is it emotional triggers? You've had several people on your show that, talk about emotions, that the neurotransmitter, for example, for the gallbladder, which sets up a right-sided headache, neurotransmitter there is acetylcholine. So acetylcholine can go down with this chronic gallbladder stress, and a person ends up with higher blood pressure. They end up, with memory issues. Low acetylcholine pathologically is Alzheimer's, is memory recall issues. So we put all that together with the structural, the emotional, the nutritional. Structural would be chiropractic, and often that's going to, much like acupuncture, if we just did that, you might get some temporary relief initially with adjusting, say, T4, the mid-back between the shoulder blades, or C6 in the lower neck. You'd feel better, maybe get rid of the headache while you're there. But the bigger win is to understand, hey, every time I eat tomatoes is a big common trigger for compromising gallbladder function. So that's some of the stuff I'm looking at clinically, and we try to shine light on in the book is, do you get a headache whenever you have tomato sauce or ketchup or, tomatoes on your in and out? Then that is compromising gallbladder function. That's what's setting up the right side of headache. So there are definitely specific foods based on the different organs or different glands, because they each have more common triggers for their demise.
So what is the headache though? Is it muscles around in and around the scalp and neck that tighten and that warp, the dura, or the other parts of the head? Like, what is it?
Yeah, great question and well stated. And there are a couple triggers, but most of it comes down to referred pain from these other glands and organs. Much like phantom pain, that somebody missing a limb still has pain where their foot used to be. Acupuncture meridians actually have that kind of an effect on people. The one, I would say, caveat, two caveats, that what I call the cyclops headache, kind of that third eye between, on the bridge between the eyes, that one's a pituitary headache. And so the pituitary is right in the center of the brain. That tends to refer pain, if you will, right to that bridge of the nose. So that's a referred pain, not directly related to a meridian, acupuncture meridian. And then the other one that goes along with your secondary description is the kind of a muscle tension headache, or what's commonly called a tension headache on the back of the head. That one is because of the muscular pattern that goes along with a thyroid compromise. What happens when the thyroid dysfunctions or is under functioning? Literally, it's hypothyroid that sets us up. Now, there's an enzyme deficiency. That's part of how the thyroid regulates metabolism, is activating and say deactivating enzymes to keep metabolism going, keep our energy up. When that's not functioning right, the muscles on the back of the neck become weak and compromised, inhibited, and that's what sets up the tension headache. So we want to facilitate that enzyme production, that, feeding, if you will, of the thyroid, which means maybe a tyrosine product or iodine. Those are some of the key nutrients to help drive the thyroid, help it function optimally. Food-wise, getting back to your earlier question, wheat, the protein structure of wheat is actually identical, literally identical. The amino acid structure of wheat is identical to the thyroid gland. And so that's where some of this, gluten sensitivity, it's not technically gluten in this case, but the structure of the wheat genome, if you will, that is going to be the same as the thyroid. If it leaks through the gut lining with what's now called a leaky gut, then that can trigger an autoimmune attack against the thyroid, and that opens the door, and, conditionally called Hashimoto's. So those are triggers. The Hashimoto's can set up disc problems, low back disc problems. That's another discussion potentially, or these tension headaches we were talking about.
What happens when someone has a migraine? What's going on there?
Before we continue, I've been personally funding the Finding Genius podcast for 4.5 years now, which has led to 2,700 plus interviews of clinicians, researchers, scientists, CEOs, and other amazing people who are working to advance science and improve our lives and our world. Even though this podcast gets 100,000 plus downloads a month, we need your help to reach hundreds of thousands more worldwide. Please visit findinggeniuspodcast.com and click on Support Us. We have 3 levels of membership from $10 to $49 a month, including perks such as the ability to see ahead in our interview calendar and ask questions of upcoming guests, transcripts of podcasts you're interested in, the ability to request specific topics or guests, and more. Visit findinggeniuspodcast.com and click Support Us today. Now back to the show.
Right. So migraine is basically, for everything I could find, spent years in the literature, basically means it's a real bad headache. It comes back to location. So what Richard might call a migraine could be a frontal headache, and what Jane might call a migraine could be a right-sided headache. Both have different causes, and it just means that it's an exaggerated pounding, throbbing type of a headache. But one relatively common thread with migraines is the pounding pulsatile type nature. Often colon, which was the headaches that I had when I was 19, those were a whole head headache. Those can be triggered by what's called high serotonin, the neurotransmitter that dilates those vessels in the brain, and that can go high under chronic stress. Concussions, post-concussions is a form of chronic stress. There's a neurodegeneration that goes along when we get bonked in the head, especially subsequent, concussions 2, 3, 4, where we lose the protective mechanism. There's a glutamate is the byproduct of a neurodegeneration from a concussion. That glutamate is like eating MSG all day. It puts us in that chronic fight or flight state. And so that can cause kind of a pounding pulsatile type of a headache. So that person, food-wise, for sure wants to be super careful on the MSG foods and the, soy sauce and Chinese foods and things that are going to have glutamate, MSGs, monosodium glutamate. That glutamate is identical to what the brain is producing when the nerves are being compromised from a concussion. So that chronic glutamate, I had one gal flew in from Montana earlier in the week, and her whole thing was she'd had 2 very bad car accidents and was out of work for a year because of the traumatic brain injury that she had. We ultimately had to quench that consequence because that chronic glutamate was causing her to be in a chronic fight or flight stress cycle. It was then deactivating her thyroid, so she was gaining weight and all over the place emotionally, and that affected her hormones and headaches and things like that. So we had to, in her case, we used lithium as a mineral that helps reverse some of the potential concussion symptoms. For her, we used a product that had lion's mane, helped activate the lithium as well. And we're expecting that to resolve all her, help her lose weight, stabilize her mood, and get rid of the headaches.
Yeah. So what are some of the other patterns of headaches? Are they all location?
They're all location specific. We talked about right-sided. We talked about left-sided. Frontal headaches, picture the person holding the front of their head. I have a headache. That is the chronic stress pattern. What happens at chronic stress, ultimately, think ulcer-like pattern, starts breaking down the stomach lining because norepinephrine, the neurotransmitter for focus, becomes low in this chronic. And norepinephrine is a preventative gastroprotective. In other words, it protects the stomach lining. So with chronic stress, that becomes low, and we lose a protective mechanism in the stomach, and that's the mechanism that sets up a frontal headache. And so that's the person that's chronically in that fight or flight. We need to help the body balance or break down some of those stress hormones, or maybe they need to make life changes, take a Sabbath day periodically and take a break here, and pray before they eat, that kind of stuff. Then we talked about the pituitary or the cyclops headache. The whole head headache tends to be colon related. And then the tension headache, the one on the back of the head, is typically a low thyroid. I think I covered all 7 there, right? Right, left, frontal, whole head, and tension headache and pituitary.
So migraine is just a more severe headache, but it still has a locality to it.
Yes. So it still fits into my first question with any of those. They say, I have migraines, and typically what it means, it's pounding and it compromises their ability to function and work. So sympathy goes out, sorry for the way it's compromising your life. Let's use that as motivation, take advantage of that to help know what the triggers are, or the person, the listener, know what those triggers are. Maybe it comes down to keeping a journal, keep track of, every time I eat pizza, then end up with the right side of headache, that kind of thing. Then,
but is it usually associated with eating, or do people wake up with headaches, or are there exercise-induced headaches? Like what are the predominant ways in which, what are the predominant precursors of headaches?
Yeah, great question. Food is a massive one. Food, can be the trigger. And food I like the blood type diet just because it is individualized to some degree. For me as a B blood type, chicken will cause hypoglycemia. Would cause me to crave sugar and gain weight over time and be unfocused and ADD-like, whereas most of the other blood types would do fine on chicken. So there are kind of biologic individuality for people, but I mean, the easiest place to start is with the blood type diet. Then that'll give you a reference to figure out, oops, I eat this avoid, what he calls avoids. When I eat that avoid food, then it's going to set up symptoms. Like I mentioned, tomatoes would do that for me. They'd cause me to fall asleep in church and be unfocused or not sleep well at night. So I don't eat tomato. And there are other foods for, each of the individual patterns of headaches.
Okay. Interesting. We talked about this offline. I almost never get headaches. I'm lucky.
Yeah.
But I do go to the chiropractor often because if I don't go, my head feels sludgy. It feels thick. Yeah. My mind doesn't feel clear. My eyes don't, they see, but it just feels like there's like an internal thickness or sludginess. What does that tell you? Is that a headache or what is that?
Do you know what vertebra he is recurringly having to adjust? Does he say every time you come in, man, C2's out again? Or does he make any statements like that, he or she?
I get like the flying seventh. So they do the side posture, they do neck, they do everything, so it's, they don't really ask, but that's what I noticed is like, that's what happens with me. I don't know why. And again, I don't know if it's what could be causing that, I don't know if you've ever felt that.
Yeah, I mean, I'm a chiropractor, so yes, I get adjusted on a regular basis, but in my world, it's, each vertebra has a different organ association. So, so C2, for example, is the second cervical, the second from the top on the neck is related to colon function, for example. So if you get adjusted in that area, that second cervical, and you feel better, then we know there's something that's compromising the way the colon is functioning. So then the next logical progression for me, or in your situation would be, what foods or what are you doing that's compromising the way the colon functions? The way you described the brain fog, I would think more along the lines of kind of a leaky gut where things are too large of proteins are absorbing through the intestinal lining into the bloodstream to trigger the immune system. And then that sets up brain fog and, sludginess. So we want to look at, is there a toxic metal? Is there a chronic stress pattern, which is very likely with your concussion history, or do we just need to eat more organic vegetables to rebuild that intestinal lining so that the body's not, so that you or the the body, for example, is not so sensitive. So yeah, that's kind of where we want to take it to the next level for you.
Yeah. Do people ever describe what I describe instead of a headache, or do people ever describe referring pains that are not in the head that accompany any of the headache types?
100%. Yeah. I mean, the same logic applies to every area of the body. Every muscle has an associated gland or organ for it. So, in undergrad, my initial anatomy class, they'd stick a scalpel into, a muscle and say, okay, what nerve does this pierce? What muscle could this pierce? And that was part of how the tests were structured. I kind of took that logic and said, I want a patient to be able to, anywhere they point on the body, I could say, oh, that's a stomach problem. That's a thyroid problem. That's a liver problem. And so anywhere, that's part of what I'm developing as the cover gets designed on the book, is want to basically do a color-coded whole body chart that says, if you have any pain in any of these green areas, look at, consider what it's going to take to help your liver function better. If you have pain in any of these yellow areas, look at what it's going to take to allow your stomach to function better. So yes, the whole body, let's think reflexology style, a lot of it's based on acupuncture. Everywhere in the body has these referred pain areas.
Yeah, I've gotten a lot of acupuncture actually at the head and neck and all that stuff. I had my, I don't know if listeners care, but I had my thyroid removed. And so I've gotten a lot of acupuncture in my neck. You get different parts of the head, post-concussion, thyroid being removed, and it helps quite a bit. I noticed with acupuncture, if you do the front of the neck, sometimes then the back tightens up. So then you soon after have to do the back. It's balanced, but it does seem to help a lot, definitely.
Right. Yeah, that's great. Yeah, the scalene muscles are some of the big kind of neck stabilizers, if you will. I get weak when the thyroid is compromised. So yeah, I mean.
So I don't know, I would guess people also get headaches from muscle tension. I mean, is it always organ linked, or is it sometimes just, they work out too much, or they're just a very tense person that they're always, let's say they're always hypervigilant, they're always tensed, and maybe that causes a headache. Are there just purely muscle, physical reasons why people get a headache?
Bluntly, no, it's always organ related. And that's kind of the fun. And, I get all week long people that come in, their identity is associated with the auto accident. Ever since I got rear-ended, I've got this neck pain, and it's my plight in life, and the thorn in my side sort of mentality. So typically what that means to me is nobody's addressed the emotional triggers, that every time they see a red Honda, their neck goes back out. That reminds them of the one that ran the light and hit them, so we can desensitize to those emotional triggers so that it's not not short circuiting every time they get exposed to it. Or foods, it could be, I get neck tension if I eat the wrong type of a sweetener, if you will, in a protein bar periodically. And that one's kind of fun because the neck will tense up almost before I'm done with the bar. It tells me, oops, that did not work. I'm not eating that one again. It can't be that fast.
Well, you said you don't have headaches leave your office, so how do you get them relief so quickly? Is it the chiropractic, or what is it?
So during a visit, we do nutritional work, we do emotional work, and structural work. And so a lot of it is, desensitizing, using emotional desensitizing techniques to clear the triggers of, the headache came on ever since, they lost their mom, or they got rear-ended, or, whatever those things are. Organs have specific emotional triggers with them as well. So, if we're talking a left-sided headache, the stomach, that would be a stomach issue. Stomach has emotions of oversympathetic, low self-esteem, disgust. So, through muscle testing, we can identify if it's in fact an emotional trigger, have the person kind of mentally access that and either adjust them while they're thinking about that emotion, that trigger situation scene, or do a kind of a desensitization protocol, which ultimately is as easy as a flexion of the head. That's a neurologic release of the tension of the injury there. So there's emotional correcting, that helps. And yes, I save adjusting for last because I want to try to get to the trigger that's causing the spine to be misaligned or subluxated in the first place. So I would try to figure out, demonstrate for the patient, if you eat this food, then your stomach's going to compromise, it's not going to function better. If you take this supplement, then your stomach, say a hydrochloric acid supplement to allow the stomach to function better, to duplicate what the stomach should be doing, give them that supplement. We can demonstrate, in this case, the pecclavicular muscle, which tends to get weak when the stomach is compromised. We can demonstrate that will literally relax with that product on their tongue or in their right hand, saying, look, this is how much better your stomach's going to function, how much less potential you would have for a left-sided headache if you were to take this supplement.
It'll be interesting. I thought about this. What if you had a restaurant where you paired enzymes with the food people were eating? But what if they would digest better, and then they would have room for dessert, not completely feeling like,
they could potentially eat more, right? So we sell more food. Good business.
It feels good after eating it, you know?
Yeah.
It was interesting. You brought up HCl. You know, I know a lot of people think like they have reflux and all that other stuff because they have too much acid. But I know a lot of people underproduce acid. So I take HCl biotics all the time, and it helps tremendously to digest faster and more smoothly, and ramp up your stomach acid a little bit. So it's a great product.
Sure. It is a great product. We sell it as well, and we have several like that. And so so then the fun as a clinician, some of the fun is, is your HCl, is your stomach acid low because of chronic stress, or is it low because you're missing a vitamin B1 or calcium or zinc? Those are key nutrients to help make stomach acid. So that's kind of where we get deeper and deeper, if you will, as the relationship as a journey goes.
What about organ massage? I've had that done. That helps a lot. And you could learn like basics, do it at home. Do you incorporate that protocol? Since you say it all comes from the organs, like, what if the liver is really tight? You massage it, kind of like milk it a bit, get it, move it, the pancreas, all the other stuff, and the colon. Would that relieve headaches pretty quickly without having to give any medication or any of that stuff?
There is value to that. I did used to do more organ manipulation, organ work, but as I am, much like chiropractic and acupressure, as I got better and better with the nutritional component, I found that we could make more immediate and more permanent changes by helping the person understand what the trigger, what the food or the emotional trigger is. Muscles and organs will change. I mean, the colon's a perfect example. That you can feel the tension in the large intestine, wherever that is. And then the muscle association with that is a very common. That is most of the cause of low back pain is colon function, is abnormal colon function, because the quadratus lumborum muscle from the bottom of the ribs to the top of the pelvis, that muscle goes into spasm when the colon's not functioning right. And, if you want to palpate the organ specifically, patients laying down, you can touch over the abdomen and feel where it's spazzed specifically. And a very common mechanism for that is, you mentioned heartburn or reflux. Heartburn or reflux, more often than not, is bile stagnation. In other words, a congested gallbladder more typically than low stomach or high stomach acid. And so if we're low on bile production, or the gallbladder is congested, the valves in the intestine will kind of spaz closed to give the body more time to absorb and assimilate those fats that it so desperately needs. And so in that case, we want to help the gallbladder function better and maybe eat more beets. Beets are very thinning for the bile. Eat less foods that are sprayed with Roundup or glyphosate, because that inhibits bile production. And that's a very common trigger for right-sided headaches, FYI, for your information. So then that can be the cause of the colon spasms that you would be able to feel. And we do the right thing for the gallbladder, and those valves in the intestine will literally relax on the table or immediately.
Very interesting. It sounds like you're very holistic. I mean, do you focus on headaches, or it's just something that you thought not much was understood about, so you wanted to write about it? It sounds like you're a functional medicine practitioner, but you've chosen to focus on headaches for this call, at least.
All of that, yes. I mean, the whole body. I started to write the book trying to cover every aspect of the body, but I'm learning new material and new things and insight every day. So God kind of gave me a vision, narrow it down to headaches. That's often been my unique offering. I teach doctor seminars all over the country, and one of the more common ones, again, is headaches, because as you mentioned, nobody else is really doing it. Most people are trying to block the inflammation, general inflammation, or, trying to do this global shotgun type approach, whereas there are specific patterns with specific triggers. And so I feel like the world really needs to know that and understand it.
Yeah, let's talk a bit more about headaches then. So what do the common headache and migraine medications do, and why do they work, or do they just not work? If someone takes a Tylenol or Excedrin PM or whatever, or take a migraine medication, what are these medications supposedly doing?
So there's a pathway in the liver called sulfation that is inhibited often by these medications. It will actually facilitate the sulfur bearing. So they're typically upregulates that pathway, and that sulfation pathway is the one that cortisol, the stress hormone, gets broken down in. So for the person that has, say, a frontal headache, it could be that they would get that temporary relief because it actually upregulates the breakdown of the stress hormones, for example. So there's mechanisms like that we could be considered that long-term they're compromising that pathway, and it's going to, get harder and harder to get relief with it. In the migraine world, they call it chronification, where a person's taking the same medication and pretty soon they're not getting response from it anymore, or they need more and more to get the results. So the typical term is, it's kind of the Band-Aid approach. It's taking down inflammation, but not addressing the cause. And it really would, again, depend on the location of the headache to determine, which medication is going to, create some temporary relief. But typically medications block physiology. In other words, they're blocking normal pathways in the body that then sets up bigger fish to fry later, bigger problems downstream. So it's always better medicine, if you will, to understand what we're doing in our lives that is teeing off or triggering these areas of pain.
Yeah, I've also heard of the concept of drug-induced nutrient depletion. A person I know, they took metformin and then they started feeling exhausted. I looked it up. I saw that it depletes B12, which lowers their energy. Told them to supplement with B12. Then they spoke to their doctor, and the doctor goes, "Oh, yeah, good. Thanks, doc." Ridiculous, So medications people take for headache or migraine, what sequela, what things does it tend to cause over time, again, through chronification or drug-induced nutrient depletion? What have you observed?
Yeah, so, most of the understanding of the liver detoxification pathways have come about from pharmaceutical research because they need to understand how they affect the body. So the NSAIDs, the non-steroidal anti-inflammatories, adversely affect the sulfation pathway, which we just talked about, with the stress hormones. It also compromises a pathway called glucuronidation, which is the main pathway for activating the T4 to T3 energy hormone of the thyroid. T3 from the thyroid is where we get the energy, kind of the spark of metabolism. So when these pathways get compromised from chronically taking, pain meds, then we start having deficiencies in these areas. We treat nutrient deficiencies. For me, clinically, I try to find, if, say, gout taking side effect on the pill, oral contraceptive pill leaches thiamine B1 and B6. So if a gal feels that she needs to be on that for whatever reason, contraception or acne or any of that, then I'm typically going to be giving her a supplement that has either B6 or B1 that is being compromised so that then she has fewer side effects, not going to have the estrogenic, potential cancer side effects and things that would go along with that. That's a good example. So sumatriptyline, the typical migraine medication, has effects on the spleen, on the liver. So we want to kind of look at nutrients, antidotes, if you will, for when they use those or take them so that the consequences are less. And again, always best case scenario to identify the trigger so they don't have to use them, period.
Amazing. Boy, there's a lot to know.
Right. Huh? Doesn't get boring.
Yeah. Last couple of questions. So when people come to you, what are they telling you when it's headache related? What are they saying? Doc, I've had this for years, or what do they tell you? Why do they come to you for relief?
Right. Because they have a pain or something that's an impediment to their quality of life, whether it's headache, back pain, thyroid. My reputation's pretty global, so to speak, as far as symptoms go. So it's pretty diverse. But yeah, especially as the book gets out and into the society, most of it, I imagine it's going to be headache related. But again, so that's the initial discussion is, Richard, give me your list of, your priorities. What would you most like to change about your health? And, I've got headaches, I've got, back pain, and, post-concussion. I got this brain fog that goes on if I don't get adjusted for 2 days. And then we look at, diet and how foods that you're consuming are helping or hindering the way the body's functioning. So, all the way to cancers and, big name diseases, Parkinson's, neurologic conditions, they all tend to respond when we get to the core of the problem.
Okay. And you practice in California, it looks like. So are you able to work with people just in California, or can you do telemedicine? Who can see you?
Yes, we do. I have 4 docs in the office, which helps because my schedule's pretty congested. But yes, we do telemedicine typically over Zoom, and we can, do video conferencing, figure out the same way and demonstrate to the person on the other end of the Zoom, demonstrate the physical change by clearing emotional triggers or helping them understand the food consequences.
Okay. But again, so anywhere in the U.S. or just California, you can work with people?
Yeah, anywhere that somebody has access to a, phone with a, Zoom access.
No, that's fantastic. Okay. And your book, is it available on Amazon, or where can people get it?
Just went up on Amazon for pre-order on a couple days ago. So it's officially set to launch mid-October. So yes, headacheadvantage.com is the website. On that, I've got some initial links where you can click on the right side of headache, and it'll help people with the typical food triggers or supplements that they might need, for example. So, and then that is going to be built up more over the coming weeks. So Headache Advantage, and then I post health pearls on Instagram and Facebook.
Excellent. Well, Scott, thanks so much for coming on the podcast. Again, I could hear hear that you're not like regular doctors and that, you look at things holistically. So I encourage anyone that has headache-related problems or other health-related problems to get your book and check out your practice. So thanks for coming.
Thanks for having me and helping to get the word out. I've appreciated the podcast that you're doing, the reach you have.
If you like this podcast, please click the link in the description to subscribe and review us on iTunes.
You've been listening to the Finding Genius podcast with Richard Jacobs. If you like what you hear, be sure to review and subscribe to the Finding Genius podcast on iTunes or wherever you listen to podcasts. And want to be smarter than everybody else? Become a premium member at findinggeniuspodcast.com. This podcast is for information only. No advice of any kind is being given. Any action you take or don't take as a result of listening is your sole responsibility. Consult professionals when advice is needed.